Alright, how's it going? I'm Grant, you. This is Doodle Review with another entry in the Ulterior Underground series where we celebrate bands, artists, artifacts and events from across the history of alternative rock. It's February right now, and a couple of days ago we crossed the 2-year anniversary of the passing of Mark Lanegan, a beloved singer and songwriter whose work spanned eras, genres and connected many unlikely artists through a web of continuous collaboration. Lanigan started music leading the severely underrated 90s grunge band The Screaming Trees, joined up with Queens of the Stone Age for their seminal albums in the 2000s, before becoming one of the most in-demand guest vocalists in alternative rock and beyond. His extended resume is probably one of the only places you'd see Moby, Slash and Beth Orton all on the same page, and throughout all of this he had a prolific solo career, releasing 12 albums of his own. Characterised by a one-of-a-kind voice, rough but smooth like buttered gravel, and a world-weary darkness in his demeanour both musically and in person, Lanigan left an indelible mark on every project he worked on, though it seems like he'd be the last person to recognise that with his very humble demeanour. His solo work really gave the dark corner of your soul some company, which is what built such a cult-like devoted audience over the years, and why I really wanted to do something to mark the anniversary of his passing. In today's episode, we're going to talk through the career of this legend via 4 or 5 key albums in his catalogue, among them some of my favourites or just ones that I think are most interesting or significant in some way. If you've clicked here, you probably already know Mark Lanegan, right? So I'm not going to do a whole history, but if you don't, well, I'll just say you've got a whole world of awesome music to dive into, and this video might help you pick out some good starting points. Let's get into it. So, Sweet Oblivion. This is the 6th album from the band that started it all for Lanigan, The Screaming Trees. For fans of the Trees, especially anyone that might have been there back in the 90s, this might be a bit of an eye roll recommendation, because within the band's canon, this is the popular one. It's the one that broke through to the mainstream and it's probably the most accessible in their catalogue. For me though, while it might be an obvious choice, I think it's a banger. The Screaming Trees are labelled as grunge, but just like most bands in that scene, they have their own thing going on. The band were never as heavy as peers like Nirvana or Mudhoney. I always say, especially when it comes to Sweet Oblivion, imagine the guitar first fuzzy arrangements of Nirvana, like the melody and the pop sensibilities, but swap out that punk aspect for more of a 60s psychedelic blues rock component, and you've got some sense of where the Trees stood in that landscape. The song that propelled this album to success, probably the most success they ever had, was the track Nearly Lost You. It's a track that, taken on the intensity of the drum performance by, at the time, new member of the Trees, Barrett Martin, and the blistering heat of the lead guitar, you'd think it'd be one of the edgiest tracks on the album. Instead, it becomes a super melodic, upbeat and actually quite sweet love song. One of those rare instances of, I'll admit, a pretty schmaltzy track actually managing to retain enough energy to be just as enjoyable as a straight up rock banger. I once played this record for a friend of mine not familiar with the Trees or Lanigan in any great way, and coming from a punk fan, his immediate reaction was, oh, this sounds like Nickelback. And while that was crushing to hear, and certainly will be scathing to Trees fans, I can understand it to some degree. If you come to this album without the reverence for Lanigan and maybe with more of an interest in the heavier side of things, you're probably going to be a little sideswiped by how melodic, mid-tempo, conventional and, dare I say, happy some of these pop rock songs like Winter Song or Butterfly turn out to be. But what grabbed me about this album though, and what keeps me coming back, is the way the Trees sound delivering these conventional rock moments. On one hand, Gary Lee Conner is laying the foundation for these inviting chord progressions, but on the other, he's ripping some killer solos and riffs that on occasion touch on the intensity of a Ron Asheton or James Williamson from the Stooges. Barrett Martin, who was new to the band here, brings thrilling intensity behind the kit, most notably to the already high energy rocker of a track like Secret Kind, but really throughout you can hear his passion propelling these tracks that in other hands might feel a bit too on the mid-tempo side. I think it's clear from Lanigan's later career, where he would ditch a lot of the conventional upbeat and accessible rock sensibilities, that this wasn't his favourite type of music necessarily. Certainly if you read Sing Backwards and Weep, his excellent memoir in which his brutal honesty about his feelings towards his fellow bandmates and their taste would be painful to read if they weren't so entertaining, it seems at points like the trees felt more of a job to him than a real point of passion. But I actually think some of this is what makes it a really interesting and fun listen. There's something to the friction that having a figure that lives in permanent midnight like Lanigan singing a song about a butterfly and selling it reluctantly, when you hear all that would come next, it makes this quite a unique aspect to the singer's career. The Trees actually had a really quite long and prolific career. I had Uncle Anesthesia and Dust. This record's older and younger brother effectively, but it's Sweet Oblivion that I come back to the most. Sadly, Sing Backwards and Weep doesn't go into too much detail on life after the Screaming Trees, but judging from some interviews I've seen with Lanigan and what I know of the timeline, Field Songs kind of marks the beginning of the beginning of a new career phase in the singer's career. There was a period leading up to this album where, even while managing to release a steady stream of music without the commercial anchor of the Trees and still recovering from years of destructive behaviour that not only destroyed relationships but kind of obliterated his finances, he was kind of in and out of music in a professional sense. Whatever his circumstances though, Lanigan's songwriting capabilities and sense of himself musically only continued to expand on Field Songs. It could be the favourite album of his solo work for me. To be honest, it's a hard choice, but this is certainly up there. Within this world of alternative folk meets alternative rock sort of singer-songwriter realm, all of the spiritual reluctance we heard from the singer in The Trees has dissipated, and you can tell this is the music Lanigan wanted to make. Dark is often a word used to describe a Lanigan joint, and while you certainly wouldn't call this record joyous, I don't think dark is necessarily the right word. Granted, it probably is the best descriptor for the classic opener One Way Street and the lesser known instrumental track Blues for D, but overall, the feeling I take from this album is one of like wary optimism. Maybe that's not quite right, but the vibe I get from songs like Pill Hill Serenade, Don't Forget Me and the title track itself, Field Song, is actually a sense of coming out of darkness, not necessarily straight into the light or a good place, but kind of in this in-between moment of stillness where you aren't necessarily sure if the next chapter is going to be happy, but that there's a sense that the worst is behind you. And based on that, this is always an album I put on when I'm feeling a bit low and maybe a bit lost. This feeling I get from the songs, the ones I mentioned, but particularly others like Kimiko's Dream House, which might be my favourite ever Lanigan track. These tracks are just the perfect soundtrack when you're trying to kind of put it all back together again. That's what I take away from it anyway. It's an absolute must listen. Okay, so let's now talk about Here Comes That Weird Chill. I recently dropped a video about the 10 classic albums from 2004 that are turning 20 this year. You can check that out in the link below if you're interested, but of course I had to mention and include Lanigan's Bubblegum album within that. For this episode though, just because that album gets a fair amount of attention anyway due to its association to that classic Songs for the Deaf era of Queen's, I thought I'd take a moment to talk about Weird Chill. It's an odd little gem that lives in the shadow of that bigger album, recorded at the same time as Bubblegum during off days between Queen's duties and featuring many members of that whole wild carnival of characters. This 8-track EP came out in 2003, just ahead of the main album, and it's just as good, but also has its own little vibe going. This collection of tracks is somehow darker and grittier than Bubblegum, even while having tracks like Message to Mine with a super poppy chorus and On the Steps of the Cathedral with its interpolation of Got the Whole World in His Hands. My favourite track on the EP is a cover of the Captain Beefheart track Clear Spot. Way back in 2006, while Queen's fans were eagerly awaiting their next album, the record that would become Era Vulgaris, Josh Homme dropped a soundbite in an interview that the music they were working on sounded dark, hard and electrical, kind of like a construction worker. Listening to the whole thing, Era Vulgaris, I kinda get it, but if you want something that actually sounds like that, you gotta check out Clear Spot or Skeletal History from this little Lanigan EP. The latter track in particular might be an example of the darkest, heaviest, weirdest he ever got on any of his solo material. is really cool. I kind of don't know much else that actually sounds like that particular track elsewhere, anywhere. Okay, another long-time collaborator of Mark Lanegan over the years was Greg Dooley, most known as the frontman and principal songwriter of the Afghan Whigs, but also the lead singer of another band, the Twilight Singers. And Lanigan made several guest appearances on records by the Twilight Singers over the years and would tour actually off and on with that group. And it was during this time the idea of the Gutter Twins was born, a fully collaborative project between Dooley and Lanigan. And according to Dooley, he actually found out about the idea of the band through a journalist who Lanigan had mentioned it to before getting around to even ask Dooley about it. Fortunately though, he wasn't put off and he thought it was a great idea, and in 2008 Saturnalia was released, and at the time this release marked the first time in quite a while that Lanigan was at the front of a real rock release, having taken a break from solo releases since Bubblegum in favour of releasing more tender acoustic music with the singer-songwriter Isabel Campbell. And while that work was fantastic, it was so good to hear Lanigan's voice once again over some grittier, up-tempo rock tracks with songs like Idle Hands, Bête Noire and Each to Each really scratching that itch for some alternative rock bangers. That being said, the influence of Dooley on the music can't be understated. One of the things that always set the Afghan Whigs apart was the real reverence the band and Dooley had in their sound for soul and R&B, and how they would fuse this with grungier aspects of rock in interesting ways. And as such, in addition to the rock tracks, Saturnalia also features some really interesting ballads like I Was in Love with You and The Body, as well as some low-key bluesier numbers like 7 Stories Underground and Who Will Lead Us, that all kind of blend electric piano, acoustic guitars and interesting digital and organic production to create something quite unique. If you're making your way through the Lanigan catalogue, do not sleep on this sadly bit of a one-off project, although they did put out a covers EP shortly after. So after Gutter Twins, Lanigan revived his solo project, releasing banger after banger after banger record that would slowly traverse from gritty blues rock into dark death disco new wave. There's not a bad record in the bunch, so do check all of them out. There are also about 1 million feature spots, which, you know, there's just too many of them to mention. But the last album I wanted to talk about was Lanigan's next full collaborative album, this time joining forces with Joe Cardamone, aka Skeleton Joe, frontman of the legendary underground LA band The Icarus Line. Using his Dark Mark pseudonym, the album would take the post-punk new wave sounds Lanigan had been mining in his solo work and combine it with the avant-garde dark digital soundscapes from Cardamone's Holy War solo material. This is a really unique album in all of the wide Lanigan canon because in some respects, even though adopting this kind of tongue-in-cheek Dark Mark pseudonym, the freeform arrangements and production of the music see Lanigan at his, I would say, most raw and exposed. And while it's easy to lose your place due to the absence of traditional song structures on tracks like Burned, Lost Animals and Heareth, after multiple listens, these can be all-consuming, soothing and meditative, and it's really interesting to hear Lanigan working in this more abstract space. It took me a while to get into this album for that reason, and due also to its denseness in size because it's so long, but it's become a really rewarding record to revisit and somehow feels more poignant even than some of Lanigan's own work since his passing. If you need your music in a more kind of straightforward song structure though, there's plenty of that to enjoy here as well. Living Dead, No Justice and Turning in Reverse deliver the late era Lanigan grit you're looking for. Don't miss out on this one. So there we go. If you're yet to listen to Mark Lanegan, or maybe you've just scratched the surface and you want to get into more, hopefully that's a few good places to start. Check out a few other videos I've got linked below this floating head, especially the top 10 albums of 2004 that Lanigan's featured in. But yeah, above all else, rest in peace, Mark. Thanks for all the music.